As I travel around the country in the course of my seminars, I meet with a lot of skeptical remarks for some of the points that we've discussed. And probably because on the one hand, they're so obvious. No mysterious techniques, no sophisticated drills, no magic. On the other hand, while they are obvious, they're simply not practiced as much as they should be. And the question, of course, is, why is that so? Moreover, each person who comes in contact with these ideas has a different agenda. People come from all sorts of industries and have different needs in different areas of concerns. So right now, I'd like you to join me in an informal question period, recreated here to discuss some of the questions I'm most often asked.
Tom, when you say perception is all there is, does this mean that promotion and advertising can make an average product or even a below-average product a real winner? Would you comment on that?
I'm a great fan of David Ogilvy's, and Ogilvy wrote a marvelous book recently called Ogilvy on Advertising, summarizing his marvelous career. His comment was that you can sell a great product through advertising and get an incredible multiplying effect, but you won't salvage a crummy one or an average one through any form of advertising or promotion over the long haul. He has a wonderful chapter on competing with Procter & Gamble, in which he gives practical advice about how to do so. And his comments are, one, don't. And second, the reason you shouldn't is because they make incredibly good product. The quality is superb, which is to say P&G, which has a public sort of image for their advertising, in fact does spend money and quite effectively on advertising, but it's in support of products that in hard-nosed consumer tests have been shown time and time again to truly be superior products. When I talk about perception, what I mean is those intangible product traits, and since we're talking about P&G as an example, and I personally am a Charmin user, one of their major brands, I really do like the squeezability of Charmin, and that's what we mean by perception, frankly. So do a lot of other people, so I'm not ashamed to say so.
What do I do when everybody on my management team doesn't think these excellence ideas are any secret to success?
Well, I think the entire point about the sorts of things we're talking about is that whether you practice them or not has got to come principally from personal conviction. And what I mean by that is the following. One of the things that I talk about a lot is the issue of scale, and I commented several times about the 100-person facility, for example, as probably being the maximum size for a human scale operation. Any accountant or any controller or any financial planner can prove 100 times over that much larger facilities make sense. Unfortunately, their arguments, which make so much sense on paper, don't make sense in the real world. So you frankly have got to deal pure and simple from conviction. For example, Frank Perdue has created that exceptional $800 million chicken company on a strong, personal, intuitive belief that you can deliver a better quality of service and a better product in the area of fresh chicken. It's conviction, pure and simple. There's no way that you could have proved it ahead of time.
Tom, how open should we be in having customers visit our facility? Do we have to plan things for them to do, or do we just let them wander around?
Well, there are two issues, I think, that you raise in that question. The how open should we be is one that almost makes me laugh, and though I'm sure it's probably a laugh with scorn in large measure. I find it's very simple. People who don't want to invite customers into their plants have a plant that's a miserable place to work and where the shoddy quality of their relationship with their workforce and their relationship to their product is immediately evident. The people who tell me that they would give secrets away if customers visited the operations are the ones who indeed would give a secret away, namely that the place is pretty crummy and not worth visiting. Now, the second part of your point, though, is slightly different, and that is I think indeed it's incumbent upon you to have an extraordinary program which takes advantage of your hopefully spotless, quality-oriented facilities and exceptional people and uses the plant as an extraordinary selling point. For example, I visited recently a Milliken & Company textile plant, and I visited with some of Milliken's customers. It was a real delight to have the entire tour led by hourly people who were the employee of the month or the employee of the week or the employee of the year, as the case may be, and people who actually ran the machines explained with pride how their machine worked, why it was a good machine, and so on and so forth. Similarly, companies have put together very sophisticated programs where the customer comes in and actually very practically gets involved in joint tailored problem-solving efforts with various functional members of the corporation whose plant or operation it is.
Tom, the crazies and the monomaniacs with a mission that you've spoken about, it sounds to me like they've sacrificed much of a rewarding personal life in pursuit of a better bottom line.
Can you really have it both ways? Or in fact, are your excellence ideas a prescription too demanding for most of us to handle?
There are probably two or three ways to really come at that question. First of all, I'd take a little bit of exception to the notion of doing it for a better bottom line. I think what we're really talking about, whether it's the person in the reception area or whether it's a person who's an engineer at a bench, we're talking about being engaged in what one does, and I think there's little danger in that. The reason that some of the people at the famous Lockheed Skunk Works came to work 7 days a week is they found it a heck of a lot of fun to be working on advanced projects and to be part of an exciting team. In fact, Kelly Johnson, the Skunk Works leader and founder, used to talk about it as an adventure. So I think, yes, indeed, there's a chance for overdoing it, but it's overdoing it in pursuit of a dream more than enhanced bottom line-ism, if you will. Now, the second part of it is as follows. I think the deepest sadness that perhaps exists in the country is that according to recent polls even, of the 100 million people or more who are on the work rolls in the United States, some 70% still say they don't like their jobs and find it a drag to come to work. These, quote, excellence ideas, unquote, if you will, involve working for better products, greater teamwork, more involvement, and so on. And I think there's a good chance that one of the marvelous byproducts of this whole process of revitalizing American business will be the creation of a system in which the average person doesn't find it a rotten deal to have to go to work on the average day. But let me also make it clear at the margin that I have great respect for that question. If you're one of those 18-hour-a-day types who loves indeed what you're doing, you had better expect to not make it to all 18 of your kids' soccer games this junior year in high school. And that's a heck of a cost, and it's one that obviously one should look at in a very mature and personal fashion.
Tom, I've just inherited a customer service situation. We've really blown it with the customer during the last few years. How do you rectify that? How do you win back customer trust?
The starting point is to go visit, go spend time, see how you can help, and to genuinely, assuming that you genuinely are, be sorry for the foul-ups and the mess that have occurred in the past. I think my own anger as a consumer, whether it's as a business person consuming business products from other vendors of mine, or whether it's as an individual, is the number of people who treat you in a shoddy fashion for a long period of time and never even bother to say, I'm sorry for blowing it.
I'm really interested in customer service measurements, but it seems to me there's a risk here of instituting a self-serving paper shuffle. How do you start a measurement system that's useful and not just lip service?
That's a great question on many scores. First, and I think it's true of all of the things that I've talked about, any system which is introduced as a panacea, namely the system per se as a panacea, without the conviction and belief of senior management lived on a day-to-day basis, or the conviction and belief of management installing the system lived on a day-to-day basis, is clearly doomed for failure. And the question is particularly good because indeed I've seen a lot of people, I'm sorry to say, who have listened to what I've had to say about the customer service measurement. They have installed a system to fix their problem, continued to hold the customer in contempt, and it has indeed become a paper shuffle of the worst sort. Now, the flip side of that is all the good intention and conviction in the world can surely be positively magnified with a system which codifies and quantifies the customer's response to the service. Most important, however, is that development of customer service measurement must 100% be driven by what I call naive listening, namely listening as to what the customer cares about, getting the customer's dimensions about what good and bad service are codified. What we think it's about, what the accounting department thinks it's about, what the salespeople, manufacturers, engineers think it's about is not the point, period.
Tom, you speak a lot about management and people. Who, in your opinion, is the most important person in the leadership hierarchy?
Well, if you would allow me to define leadership in a very unconventional way, the most important person in the leadership hierarchy, if one is in the hotel business, is the man or woman who is answering the phone on the reservations bank usually hidden and stuck away somewhere in a basement and not paid very well. I mean, what does leadership mean? We talk about exceptional strategic competitive advantage and all kinds of words like that. If you're talking about the Marriott Corporation, exceptional competitive advantage means the way the corporation as a whole, all of its many tens of thousands of people, deal with the customer. And so leadership to me is not some function that has to do with bosses or managers or any of that nonsense. Leadership has to do with people who take responsibility for their job, for themselves, for their teammates, for the corporation. So I strongly believe in the notion that many have in fact codified of the so-called upside-down organization chart. The people at the top are the people who are making the product, servicing the product, selling the product. The people in particular who have first line, face-to-face, or voice-to-voice, as the case may be, customer contact.
Tom, in my company, we've got a very strong union, and it's been a traditional sense of labor management mistrust. I wonder how we can institute changes when we've got that kind of mistrust. And I wonder, in reference to your Worthington story, is there a union there, and how, if there is not, would he have handled that with a strong union?
One of the great delights for me, and I say that particularly since I have been a long time and vociferous critic of the automobile industry, is to see that the most exciting workplace experiments in the last few years have happened not so much in my delightful, excellent companies of the past, but in places like General Motors, the Ford Motor Company, and so on. Decisions to, for example, at the new Toyota General Motors facility in Fremont, California, cut the number of job classifications from 80 down to 3, decisions to, in fact, get rid of first-line supervisors, and so on. So I find that enlightened union management cooperation is becoming certainly not the norm yet, but is becoming non-rare, if you will, in recent times. So that's where I'd start. Even the United Steelworkers have gotten on the bandwagon. Near the end of 1985, LTV, the steel company, signed a landmark agreement with the USW, which also got rid of job categories, involved a wage cut that took the LTV contract wage down below the USW norm, but it would be made up by twice-a-year productivity bonuses that would be expected if quality and profitability were up to snuff. So recalcitrant or non-recalcitrant union, it can be done. Above all, what's called for is patience and conviction on the part of management. In the case of Worthington Industries, the chairman, John McConnell, fundamentally instilled the programs that he did because he believed in it, because he had had crummy hourly jobs himself. He thought it was the right thing to do, period. He believed that people who, in fact, were being treated well, worked in clean facilities, and so on, were likely to be greater contributors. Now, indeed, McConnell does have unions in several of his facilities. In most instances, after several years and without management pressure, the unions have voluntarily decertified. In some few instances, that hasn't been the case, but even in the unionized operations where decertification hasn't taken place, there's been immense progress in quality, absenteeism decline, and so on and so forth. So it is doable.
Tom, you don't seem to have much good to say about strategic planning. Does your stress on innovation and encouraging failures mean strategic planning is just a waste?
No, not at all. I do not believe in strategic planning done by the corporate center. I do believe in strategic planning done at the so-called strategic business unit or lowest profit-making level in the corporation. I consider myself to be one of the world's great fans of strategic planning. It's just that I think that it should be done by the people who are going to execute the plan, number one, and secondly, I think that we should never allow quantity to get in the way of quality. Namely, the greatest strategic plans that I've ever had a chance to review will cover a $150 million business in 2 or 3 pages, and if possible, cover it as Procter & Gamble does in 1 paragraph. That's the right length of the plan as far as I'm concerned. Now, the notion of the champions and the modest degree of chaos that I support in the innovation area is not at odds with this. I believe from an innovation standpoint, for instance, that one should have central research and development, should invest heavily in it. But I believe that that central research money, for example, should be directionally aimed at the areas where the company hopes to strike gold. Within those generic target areas, the way one seeks gold is to allow a large number of moderately crazy champions to go seek their own dream within the somewhat circumscribed parameters of the central objectives of the organization.
Your formula for high value-added products may work in good times, but I've trouble with this approach in tougher times. Doesn't survival then depend on cutting the costs of value-added features? Can your formula still apply?
Two ways to answer that question. First of all, let me never be on the side of the devils in saying that cost doesn't matter. We have fantastic corporations, some that I looked at recently, such as Caterpillar Tractor, who are hemorrhaging, to put it mildly, because their cost base was radically out of line with that of their competitors. The line that I like best is one that was uttered to me by a senior manufacturing officer at the IBM company. He said, competitive cost structure is absolutely essential to survival. On the other hand, he said, I've never seen an absolute low-cost-oriented company be a company who was a survivor in the long haul because they give up their focus on quality, service, features, innovation, and so on. So, for starters, cost is important, and I'm not against having cost under control, to put it mildly. However, the more significant part of the answer, really, in many respects, is that I would have bought your assessment a couple of years ago myself. But the most sophisticated business database that exists, the PIMS database, is a database covering tens of thousands of companies, and interestingly, it shows that its key success variable, relative perceived product quality, is more important in declining markets, for example, than it is in growing markets.
Tom, what about competing on price to establish market share? You've made the case that this is a loser's game, but it still seems to me like an acceptable strategy in some cases.
It's not a loser's game, it's a loser's game and an unbelievably stupid game. The only question worth asking is, how do we differentiate the product to make it worth a decent price? A friend of mine works for IBM, but started her career, she's now an IBM sales branch manager, one of their super fast trackers, started her career for More Business Forms, another superstar company with about a 30% return to shareholders' equity, which is exceptional indeed. She said Moore had a wonderful tactic. Moore made the same darn business forms that everybody else made, jacked the price up by 40%, and then said to the field sales and service force, you figure out how to add 40% more value to the product on the basis of what you can deliver. The difficulty is that once you get into price competition only, you can never, ever pull out of it again. You can't be the low-price player, make no money, have no money to invest in the training of your workforce or your manufacturing equipment, and then decide once you've got, quote, market share, unquote, that then you're going to jack the price up and invest again. Because what you lose when you take the price down is you lose the service, you lose the quality, you lose the image, and it takes decades to come back once you've lost that edge in your customer's mind.
Tom, your position on accepting failure is tough to take and tough to explain to my people. Now, how can you tell if you've some genuinely thoughtful mistakes on your hands or a chronically slipshod and incompetent crew?
Well, let me be nasty in answering. If you can't tell whether you've got slipshod people or competent people, you ought to quit your own job first and do everybody a favor who works for you. I get incredibly violent and emotional responses to this issue of trying to support failure and good tries that fail and all that kind of stuff. If a management can't judge whether a person who's working for him has made an honest effort and has made a decent try and has been thoughtful, that's a pathetic state of affairs. What we're talking about is not sloppiness, not slipshod behavior. We're talking about the need to move fast, try stuff, get on with it, test. Nothing makes me more nauseated than to go into the meetings of some of these big corporations and chart after chart is put up on the wall, and the only discussion that you see is why we couldn't get this done because we couldn't finish our interfacing. Well, nobody ever bought a damned interface. They buy products, and the only way you get a commercially successful product is to get it into a test market, into the hands of a customer in very short order.
Tom, what about the not-for-profit organization? Do you think that your research is relevant here? I mean, in many of those organizations, the real bottom line is staying within budget, and there's no real profit line.
I've worked with a few nonprofit groups, and what I've always said to them is that I consider them to be the luckiest people in the world, particularly nonprofit operations that depend heavily on volunteers. And I say that in the following sense. In our opinion, excellence in the private sector comes when a large share, if not all, of the workforce is deeply committed to the product, to the service, and to their colleagues. Any such deep commitment, by definition, is volunteerism. And now the little twist of words here is what I have said to my nonprofit friends is you are the luckiest people in the world because you are the only people who do not live life with illusion. If we want excellent anything from any organization, it has to be generated on the basis of commitment and care for the people who work there. The person running a nonprofit, primarily volunteer agency has to induce that commitment by treating people decently and making them want to come back to be part of the fundraising drive next year, to answer the phone banks or do whatever the case may be to support the effort. So that's my biggest feeling about it in that particular area. Second point that I would offer relative to nonprofits, and I feel this about many organizations, but nonprofits seem to be uniquely incompetent when it comes to marketing. And I think learning from the great marketers in the private sector is something that about 90% of the nonprofit sector could indeed benefit from. Same story in nonprofits as in the world of profits, though. If your entire focus is on the budget, then you forget the whole point of the activity, which is to serve the customer and generate revenue. No exclusivity on the part of the nonprofits here. Most of the profit-making companies focus virtually exclusively on the budget and forget the whole point of the deal is to sell products that are worthwhile to customers.
My business depends wholly on a direct mail marketing approach, and I have, of course, thousands of customers. But I rarely see these customers face to face. And based on what you're saying, I'm awfully close to losing touch with them. How can management by wandering around work for me here?
I'm very delighted for that question. There are some areas, direct mail being one of them, the world of a Procter & Gamble who sells jillions of rolls of toilet paper and bars of soap each year to an faceless public is another one of them. There's no rule in the direct mail business that says that you can't go out and find those customers and talk to them. For example, in my part of the world, the San Francisco Bay Area, there's a marvelous maker of sporting goods. And there's a not-so-marvelous maker of sporting goods also in the same area. One of the biggest differences between the two is that the marvelous maker of sporting goods decided to open up, though their business is 99.9% mail order, let me add, decided to open up one retail outlet. The reason they opened the one retail outlet was not to figure out whether they could make it in retailing, but to find a place where their people could circulate through as clerks and so on and be in direct touch with that ultimate customer.
Tom, how can you collect vital customer feedback when you're not in control of your distribution network?
Most people who aren't in control of their distribution network aren't in control of their distribution network because they let it happen to themselves. The franchise laws in the United States are pretty rigid, and they tell you what you can do and you can't do to a franchisee, for example, and the franchisee is by design at arm's length. There are some companies that have franchisees through whom they collect extensive customer data. There are other companies whose franchisees wouldn't let them in the door if they came in with a pile of new dollar bills. It basically focuses on, as all of life, and I hate to sound like a broken record, building the relationship with the channel, whether it be a direct sales force, a retail area, a sales representative, or a franchisee. The winners in the franchise game have been people who have foregone volume in favor of quality, who have developed a situation with their franchisees where they're in touch, in control, providing something of value, and weeding out the dogs with great regularity. Let's take another area. I've worked in the home computer business, and there's some big players in the retail area there. And one of the home computer companies I work with says, we can't learn anything from our customers because the retailers won't let us touch them. And my response to them, which I'm delighted to say they've tested in a few areas, is I've said, if you give something away, they'll probably give you something. And make a deal with those people that you'll allow them to give away some free software that you'll pay for, and in response for giving away the free software, which is a straight cost saving to that retailer or a marketing aid to that retailer, He's got to allow you or she's got to allow you some kind of touch with data. Relationship building in a systematic, substantial way, in a catch-as-catch-can way, in any way whatsoever is the heart of the matter. It can be done if we don't walk into it with a defeatist attitude.
How can I make my distributors, or rather, how do I encourage them to be more responsive to my products and my customers?
Step number one, most obvious and most often ignored, is to have a better product with better service that your customers actually would like. Advertising won't move a crummy product, and being nice to the channel won't move a crummy product either. So step number one is to provide value, pure and simple. Value can come in any number of ways, shapes, and form. First of all, it can come as simply a better quality product, namely the Maytag washing machine, for example. Secondly, it can come through a series of other more indirect inducements. For instance, the Toro Company, the lawnmower people, deals with a distribution channel where their distributors carry multiple lines of goods. Toro is developing a terminal and software program wherein the distributor will get a lot of good software that helps with Toro's activities and also helps with the business person's activities, and that's a great inducement to develop a relationship. Now, that's side number one. Side number two is my hard-nosed side, and my hard-nosed side says that if you do systematic analysis of your channel, you will find that a small share of your distribution channel gives you a large share of your profits. One fella in the hardware wholesaling business, in fact, who has really run his numbers carefully, commented, and I know this sounds outrageous at first glance, that 155% of his profits were coming from the top 40% of his customers. Now think about that for a minute. What it basically means, quite obviously, is he is losing a pot full of money with the other 60% of the distribution channel that he is dealing with. With that top 40%, he, who is a high value added, top service, top quality company, he is able to have superior relationships, find some people who are responsive to the kind of product and service that he offers, and everybody wins in the long haul.
Tom, what can I do to create heroes out of my customer service and salespeople? I'm convinced our company just doesn't give them the recognition they deserve.
There are a large number of techniques in creating heroes. But before talking about just one or two of them, the most important point is this is not a technique issue. The first step is to believe that they're heroes. The thing that always strikes me about the IBM company and the Frito-Lay company and what differentiates them from so many of their competitors or companies in general is that the first step toward creating sales and service heroes in IBM and Frito-Lay is that everybody in IBM and Frito-Lay, even in the plants, really believe that those people are heroes. So as always, it starts out with the genuine belief. Now, how does one actually go about it? Well, one way you treat people as a hero is to pay them well and give them decent working facilities. It is no surprise, and I am not a fan of believing that pay is necessarily the only part of motivation. In fact, I don't think that at all, but it is no surprise that the companies who seem to do best on the sales and service side certainly pay their people in that area a fair wage. Secondly, they recognize them in any number of ways. Recognition events from Mary Kay to Tupperware to IBM to Frito-Lay are stupendous indeed. Now, one other small aside as I say that, by the way, when we talk about recognition events, certainly all of us have heard of recognition events for members of the sales force. Have you ever heard of a recognition event for dispatchers or for receptionists? It will come as a surprise to many, but there is not a statute on the U.S. books that says that you can't invite a top receptionist to a sales celebration activity. We can do it. We can recognize people in any number of fashions. Other simple ways, the company newsletter. The company newsletter can be a newsletter that focuses exclusively on acts of customer service heroism by people at all levels in the organization. Fine, you say, and you're even going to listen to me and do one. How frequently are you going to do your customer service newsletter? Well, if you're like most organizations, you'll do it once every 6 weeks or every 8 weeks or every quarter. What about doing one every 3 days? Or if you're lazy and slovenly, why not do one once a week? Disney, within each of its theme parks, does a customer service heroism awards newsletter daily, 365 times a year, except for leap years.
I'm in a small company, and things like big, fancy customer research studies and structured focus groups are all too expensive for us. What are some effective but inexpensive steps we can take to find out what our customers want?
One of the companies that I talk about a lot is the extraordinary grocery store, Stu Leonard's in Norwalk, Connecticut. Now, indeed, Stu has pretty much become a big company with 500 people and $90 million plus in sales, but he is a one-shot grocery store. And long before Stu became a big company, quite simply, he had those focus groups quite inexpensively on a weekly basis. And what is a focus group? Well, indeed, you can make it a big rigmarole, sophisticated market research. You pay the consultants $250,000 kind of deal, and those may be valuable from time to time, even if you are small. But basically what it means for Stu is that once a week in an office that's upstairs in the store, he invites a couple of dozen customers in, invites all his department heads in, and they sit down and chat a while. So if you can't stomach the notion of, quote, focus group, unquote, how about substituting the words, have a chat? We're talking about stuff that can start at the almost zero level.
Tom, what about my own department, where we've been kind of following this excellent stuff, but the company as a whole does not? And we've seen progress within the department, but the company as a whole has not. How do I keep my people motivated to keep sticking to that stuff?
Well, the story is a good news, bad news story. First of all, I've seen virtually no evidence of revolutions from the bottom. So you may be doing an extraordinary thing, but I don't expect it to spread to the rest of the organization. That's point one. Point number two is I think it is clear that the individual manager within his or her space can make an exceptional difference and make his or her space an exciting place to work. However, there is a point number three, and that's one that frankly is a conundrum about which I don't know what to do either. And that is, if you are typical of a talented, fast-moving manager, you will create excitement amongst your people, and then you will do so well at your job that 18 months later, or 12 months later, or 24 months later at the longest, they'll promote you out of the job, and doubtless your people will then be confronted by the same old stuff and the same old routine of a manager who doesn't believe in these activities. And so to be honest with you, it's a moral dilemma that I can't confront, whether it's better to have given people a 18-month breath of fresh air only to close the door again, or whether maybe it's not better to have started in the first place. It's a tough issue. Most significantly, I believe that the manager, well down in the worst of organizations, can make a difference, can make his place exciting, hopefully through his long-term persistence and perhaps through his performance, convincing his peers he or she can make a long-haul difference as the new wave slowly makes it up the organization.